Okay, today we're going to be working for our reading unit on comparing and contrasting the events and ideas in primary and secondary sources. We're working on a research paper about the American Revolution. We're picking out the heroes of the American Revolution. So we're going to look at creating an introduction, a body, and a conclusion. So we talked about in your introduction how you have the hook, that you have the thesis, or what are those three subtopics about. And then you also want to talk about, what is the overall, what are you trying to convey to the reader? So when you think about how you look at all these different texts, when we go into Get Epic, we were looking at the heroes of the American Revolution, and we went into Duxters. We were looking at all the different people that Paul Revere or Thomas Jefferson. So when you read each of these stories of these texts, you're thinking, well, am I reading with the same strategies? So if you were looking at a primary source, if you were in Smithsonian Institute, it was like an actual document or something, a photograph or something important from that time period. Like when we said with Thomas Jefferson, we were looking at the actual Declaration of Independence that he had helped to write. So are you reading that with the same strategy? Is that the same way that you're going to be reading that? So today I want to teach you that people read differently based on the discipline in which they're reading. Readers of a science text are going to read differently than the readers of a history text because, different things are important in science than in history. So the researchers in history pay attention to your who, your where, and your when. So history readers pay attention to who, when, where, and when. So the who is what people are you learning about? So we're talking about the heroes of the American Revolution. How are they affecting each other? What is the contribution that they made? When we said like Molly Pitcher, that she continued to fire the cannon even when her husband was ill, that she continued to take over for him, what she had done. And we talked about those contributions of specific people that had helped. Even with Thomas Paine, when he wrote the pamphlet about common sense, how he inspired people. So how did they affect each other? And what larger group do they represent? So what is the role, maybe of the geography, when you're talking about the people that were in the North, people that were the 13 colonies when they were fighting against Great Britain? What was happening in Boston? Remember with the Boston Tea Party, all these events that happened, the Sugar Act, the Stamp Act, the Townshend Acts, all these different high taxes that Great Britain was putting on the 13 colonies, but they were not getting representation in Parliament. So that's what they were angry about. So they were being taxed, but they were not represented in the Parliament. So what is the location of the 13 colonies when you think up and down the coast? What's the timeline of the specific events of that American Revolution? So when you go into Duxters, there's a whole timeline that you can follow of the American Revolution, and you want to talk about what were these events that happened. So it was, if you're going to be doing the Heroes of the American Revolution with Crispus Attucks, you're talking about that it was in 1770, that was the Boston Massacre. So you want to put in that timeline as you're doing your research paper. So you want to dive into the book on Epic. It's Heroes of the American Revolution. How did they make these contributions? So as we read together, let's think about the who's, the where's, and the when's. So Crispus Attucks was the first to defy, the first to die in the American Revolution, had been a slave in Framingham, Massachusetts. He escaped in 1750, but little else is known about his life before March 5th, 1770. That night, he was in Boston on King Street. He was one of a large group of Americans who crowded around a troop of British soldiers, calling them lobsters and bloodybacks because of their red uniforms. The Patriots threw snow and chunks of ice at the soldiers. Crispus Attucks stepped forward, holding a thick piece of wood, attacked the main guard, strike at the root. Attucks called to the others, "Shoot if you dare," he yelled at the soldiers. The soldiers shot. The Boston Gazette reported that Attucks was hit and killed instantly, most horribly. So that night, later called it the Boston Massacre. Attucks and 4 others were the first to die in the struggle for the American independence. So you want to say who, Crispus Attucks, where did it happen? So in Boston on King Street. When did it happen? It was March the 5th, 1770. And then who was he yelling at? What happened? So you want to say, why were they considered heroes? What were they fighting against? And then you want to look at the timeline of the events, that the actual timeline of the American Revolution, and place that in that timeline. So you know that the first battle of the war was fought in Lexington and Concord, Massachusetts. That was in April 1975. But 5 years before, that's when we had the Boston Massacre in 1770. So remember, when reading as a historian, the important things to pay attention to are the who, the when, and the where. So when you create your research paper, you're going to do an introduction paragraph. You're going to do a body that has 3 of the heroes that you're going to pick, and then you're going to do a concluding paragraph. So you're going to want to summarize what's happening. You don't want to copy word for word. You want to summarize what happened. How are these contributions important to the American Revolution?